Hi everyone! You know I had to pump out at least one epic skull look this season, and I'm really proud of the result. If you enjoy my content, please leave me a like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Without further ado, let's get into the process of how I created this look. I'm starting off this look by covering one of my eyebrows. I'm using some Elmer's glue and a palette knife to basically just flatten down my eyebrow hairs. Then I set with a translucent powder and added a full coverage foundation over top. Even though it wasn't really necessary for this particular look, I decided to go the extra mile and color correct with some orange eye primer. Once that is blended and set, I'm going in with a black pencil and mapping out the bones on this half of the skull. At this point, I didn't actually know I was going to be doing a full skull look, so I'm working on one half of my face and then doing the other one after. My biggest advice for drawing the bones is to follow a reference. I usually just use a photo of a real skull to help me out, but you can also just use my look or another skull artwork as a reference. As soon as I finish mapping out all the bones, I'm going to be creating my color palette. I'm using IndiBeat Cosmetics colored foundations, which are called FaceBass, and I'm just putting a little dollop of each color on my palette. I do have a discount code with IndiBeat, so if you're interested, I will have that information down below in the description, along with the specific shades that I used, which was pretty much all of them. I'm also using the P.Louise Cosmetic Bases in nearly all of the shades. Again, I will put the list of the shades in the description. I decided to just go in and apply these directly to my face, but I also did squeeze some product out onto my palette. So I had an idea of how I was going to arrange the colors because I did do a sketch on my iPad, and this is important because you do have to be careful not to put certain colors next to each other or else there could be muddiness. For example, there needs to be a pink between a purple and orange, and there needs to be a yellow between green and orange. I'm just buffing out all the colors and blending them together using various blending brushes. My advice at this point is to be prepared to use a crap load of brushes and also be prepared that the primer and colored foundation will not wash off as easily as eyeshadow. Oil-based face paint is even more difficult to wash out of brushes, so just be careful and maybe don't use your favorite brushes depending on what products you're using. I actually am using a lot of my favorite brushes, but I was prepared and I knew that it would just take extra effort to clean my brushes this time around. My method when doing this type of look is to kind of just follow my creative process, so it looks sort of similar to like how a lot of people would paint. You kind of just create like a general map and then continuously add in like more and more detail with each step. It definitely can come across a little bit chaotic for a makeup look, but it's just my artistic process, so I apologize if it seems chaotic to you. By the way, after I blended out all of the eye primer, I started mixing in with some of the colored foundations to create more depth and create certain shades like the darker purple and blue. To create the teeth, I'm just removing some product with a cotton swab and then adding in lighter colored lines. I'm going to start going in with some eyeshadow. I'm using colorful eyeshadows from Sugarpill, Ofra, and Blend Bunny Cosmetics. I'll try to put all the specific shade names in the description. Again, you might notice I'm using just a ton of different brushes, and this is really just so important because it can be really easy to just accidentally blend pink and then blend green, and then boom, you've created some brown. The good thing is that at this stage, it is pretty easy to fix mistakes. You'll see later on I do go back and forth a little bit between the liquid products and the eyeshadow. I'm using darker eyeshadows and more precise brushes to create shading and texture. I like to add a ridge around the eye socket and along the cheek and jawbone. I think it's really nice to add in texture because even if it's not the most anatomically accurate, it's still like stylized and I think it looks really cool. I'm also adding a lot of shading around and in between the teeth. Again, I'm not being super precise, I'm just kind of getting the general lights and darks in there. I'm going back in with a black pencil and just reforming the shapes of the bones to make them more defined. And then I'm going in with a black eye primer and black face base and just filling in all the negative space. I'm being sure to bring it around the bones, into my hairline in some areas, and I'll be dealing with the ears later on. Once I have all that negative space blacked out, I'm going in with some eyeshadow to set it. I'm now going back in to add another layer of detail. I'm using a light purple to define the teeth more. I'm also going in with lighter shades of all the other colors just to add the highlights into the textured areas and the areas where I created a ridge. Adding in the details around the teeth is where it gets a little bit confusing with a lot of back and forth. I'm going in with eyeshadows to add shading and then going back in with liquids to add more defined highlighted areas. I'm really just developing the details. I never really plan exactly how I'm gonna do the teeth. I just kind of go with the flow and whatever I'm feeling for whatever look I'm doing. I like to make them look three-dimensional and fairly realistic, but of course they're not perfectly accurate. You can definitely go more realistic, or you can do it in a more stylized approach depending on what you're comfortable with. Finally, I'm applying lots and lots of translucent powder to set absolutely everything, because the next step is going to be adding more details with water-activated paint. I'm using some water-activated paints from my Glisten Cosmetics custom palette. I'm using pastel shades to go in and define the lightest highlights on the ridges and areas of texture on the bones. I also used the black and white shades from my Mehron Paradise AQ palette. I noticed that the Mehron ones are actually much harder to remove. They require like a makeup remover as well as water, whereas the Glisten ones remove much more easily with just water. Of course, I'm also further defining the details around the teeth. I added some light yellow to the high points of the cheekbone. This was as far as my plan went, so at this point I wasn't really sure what to do with the rest of my face. I had an idea to do the other half of the skull black and white and sort of fade them into each other. Of course, I had to go to Instagram for some validation, and I asked my followers what they thought. Enough people agreed with the black and white idea that I felt fully validated and went ahead and did it. I'm basically going to be following the same steps as I did, except with just black and white. I covered and concealed my eyebrow. Then I applied a base using the white foundation. Just like I did on the other side, I'm using a black pencil to map out the bones. I'm trying to make it as symmetrical as I can, but I do end up adjusting some of the shapes later on. Since I'm only using black and white instead of more than like 6 different colors, the steps definitely do go by way faster on this side of the skull. I'm just adding some black everywhere where I know there's going to be shading, like around the teeth and other textured areas. I'm using some gray to start blending out some of the shaded areas. I'm also adding in black to fill in all the negative space. I was pretty overtired by this point, so I'm definitely a little bit all over the place with the steps here. I just wanted to finish it up as quickly as I could, while also making it even to the other side. Since the only white areas would be the lightest highlights, I wanted the base to be more of a light gray so that I could add in the whites over top. That's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm just layering on some white to the highlighted and textured areas. I'm also forming the teeth, and again, just trying my best to make it match the other side. I'm blending out those gray areas and then going in with pure black to define the shadows between the teeth, along the bone ridges, and any other areas of texture. I'm using smaller, more dense brushes to blend out the shadows more precisely. And then I'm going in with a fluffier brush and some deep gray to diffuse the shadows. I'm using eyeshadow to add more depth and to start setting the base. I'm using black from Blend Bunny Cosmetics to really define those deeper areas. I'm also using a gray eyeshadow from the Blend Bunny Cosmetics Blends palette to smoothly buff out that black. I do have a discount code with Blend Bunny Cosmetics in case you're interested. I always put that information in the description. I'm taking a break from shading just to fill in the eye with black. As I really define those dark negative space areas, I'm checking back and forth with the other side to make sure I'm being mindful and trying to make it as symmetrical as I can. Of course, I'm using black eyeshadow to set all of those dark areas. Then I'm going in with more black to deepen the textured part of the bones. And of course, I gotta go in with more white. I'm adding in the shapes of the teeth and the highlights around them. So I'm using the white eye primer because it is thicker than the white foundation. I'm really just going back and forth between highlights and shading until I'm completely satisfied. And then once I am satisfied, I'm going in with translucent powder and setting everything. This is probably one of the most satisfying steps. It's like setting in place all of your hard work. Now it's time to go in with the water activated paints and add in the final details. I'm using white to highlight some of the larger areas of bone. Since I did make the base gray, I had to go back in and add some of those lighter areas back in. I'm trying to make the variation in gray tones match the variation in color tones on the other side of the skull. What I mean by that is I'm just trying to create enough different tones of gray to make the black and white side look as shaded and as detailed as the other colorful side. I'm using super thin brushes to add in the more precise highlights. These are actually nail art brushes from Shein that I got to do graphic eyeliner looks with. I do find them really fun to use for line work. They are pretty good, but I do want to invest in some higher quality ones because these ones are a little bit flimsy. The really small eyeliner brush that I'm using to add highlights to the teeth is actually a small paintbrush that I cut to be even thinner. It's become one of my favorite detail brushes. I'm trying to make the shading and highlights on and around the teeth as even as I can with the other side, which of course is pretty difficult because I like to go back and forth adjusting it like 50 times. Once I'm finally done with both sides, I really wanted to fade the color into the black and white side. I'm going back in with some purple eyeshadow to fade out the purple teeth, and then of course I'm using all the other colors to fade all of the areas into the black and white. Continuing on with the final touches, I'm adding a highlight around the nose hole. I'm also adding some color into the nose because I wanted to give the illusion of the bone kind of fading back further into the skull. I'm using my thin brushes and black water activated paint to really define the lines around the bones. For my neck and chest, I went with a different approach than I ever have with a skull makeup look before. I decided to go for sort of a melting rainbow vibe. I'm just applying each color and bringing it down my neck in stripes. I'm bringing it all the way up and connecting it to the black underneath my jawbone. As I get to the black and white side of my face, I'm fading that rainbow into gray that then turns into black. Of course, I have to set all of that with some eyeshadow and translucent powder. I also had to add in my fave whiteout contacts. These lenses are from the brand Kazzue, and I have a link for where I purchased them in the description as always. Once the contacts are in, I'm just lining my waterline and tightline with black. I also decided I needed to add in a bit more color going into my hairline. In fact, I kind of wish I added just a little bit more. I also went in and blacked out my ears. Finally, I'm done. If you enjoyed this look or video, please leave me a like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate any support. Thank you so much for watching. I love you, and I will see you soon.